Well, just before the coffee break, we have Piero Nicoli again with Image Wars. Let's hope that today there are not more memes in Italy, right? In Italy.
Who knows? Maybe not in Italian. Okay, so welcome. I'm happy to have all of you here and to have a little test, like to begin with. So raise your hand if you know where this is going. I really hoped I saw more hands, but that's fine. That's not many. Am I too old already? Okay, thanks. Yeah, so welcome again, and welcome to, will you start? Yes, and welcome to this talk about image optimization. I don't have a soundtrack for this, I'm sorry, but I'm entirely sure that it's playing in your head already. So that's proper text, it's not the actual one for the movie. But what happened is we started working on image optimization a couple years ago, actually. We started discussing image optimization in Plone 6 a couple years ago, more than 2 years ago, in a sprint in Bonn, the Beethoven sprint. And there was a lot of discussions. A pull request happened with the proof of concept, and with a lot of replies, a lot of feedback from several people, and different implementations happened. We tried several things, and we came up with something a year later, which was beginning of this year, and yeah, as it was already said at the I think it was the State of Plone keynote yesterday, we now have something, but I'll get back to that later. So I'd like to start from the beginning. So this is kind of the agenda for this talk. So this is a talk mainly focused on what's the proper way to use images on the web, and then we'll see what's in Plone already. Most of this content comes from a great blog post that I stumbled upon a year ago, or more or less, which is that one. And of course, the blog post is quite long for you to read now, so I will show the link later, but let's get right to the content. So this is how you write an image on the web, right? I mean, it works for sure. Is that enough? Of course not. It has a whole lot of issues, and if you send this to the page speed enforcement empire, they will win. And we're not happy with that. And our rebellion starts with lazy loading. So what is lazy loading? Of course, that's how you add lazy loading to an image, the standard way to add lazy loading to an image. So that means not loading the browser will not download the image, the actual image, until it makes sense to do so. What does that mean? Well, it's actually browser defined what it makes sense means. But usually it's when you scroll to a proper distance from the image. So when you're getting close to the image, while scrolling the web page, the browser will start the download. And there are two options for this HTML attribute. the one that's usually used is lazy because the other option is the default one, so you basically don't write that usually, but you can write loading eager if you want. It's just useless. And as I said, the implementation is defined by the browser, and I want to stress the thing that it's browser controlled because browsers still have very different behaviors on this. Well, they all behave the same way, but the distance that they use and the probably heuristics they use to decide when to download an image are their own, and they're different. But this is still, they all work pretty well. So I'm happy with their differences. This is important to do in most of the images you have on your website. Of course, it's a powerful weapon to beat the empire. It's not to be used always. You want the images that are above the fold of your web pages to be loaded as soon as possible. So don't overuse this. Like the logo of your website, for example, or if you have a big hero image on top of your homepage, don't lazy load that. The page speed enforcement empire actually gives you some hints on this. Also, the Lighthouse tool does. What's next? Another powerful tool, and the one that we kind of discussed the most, and is still a topic of discussion, is the source set. The source set is a tool that you can use to help the browser understand the proper image to download. You can tell the browser, so I have these several versions of my image of different sizes, and the browsers can be taught how to download the proper image. So this is the important thing to note here is the browser can decide which image to use based on the screen size and the screen resolution. So as it is written there in my example, if you have, so the source set there, I should explain that first, defines two images. There I have two images, and the first one, the mini image, has to be used for a size of 400. The W is a dynamic unit, and I'll explain that later. And the big image is to be used for 800 width. Why is the unit dynamic? Because it multiplies the screen size and the pixel density of the screen. So if you have a 400 pixel screen, the mini image will be used unless it has more than, unless it has a high pixel density. So in order, if you have a retina display, for example, you will see a bigger image. You will need a bigger image in order to see the proper details on the image. But that's all handled by the browser if you write the source set properly. Source set can use pixel sizes instead of widths, can be more complicated, but let's stick to the simple examples for now. This is what is needed the majority in the majority of the use cases. So that's fine. There is one important way that we can make this a little more complex, which is the way we write that if we want to serve multiple formats of the image. So what does that mean? As you might know, WebP, for example, JPEG 2000 or other modern format have come up in the last years. WebP has been out for several years, actually. And they are way better than the usual PNG and JPEG for compression. And the quality they offer is actually pretty good. So we should use that. We should use WebP all the time. WebP, so we checked last night, WebP has more than 96% global reach. So it's fairly safe to assume that almost everybody will have WebP capability on their browsers. But still, you might want to offer more than one image format. So what if you want to say, I can offer PNG formats like this one in your image? And what if you want to say, for the same image, I also have a WebP? So if you want to serve both, that's how you do it. So you add a picture tag, you add a source tag with an extra source set, and you specify the type of, so the image format for that one. And so in this situation, the browser will actually see if it can serve, if it can use WebP. If the browser can, they will use that source set. If it can't, it will use the image tag. Well, the next thing actually in the picture, because if you have more than two, you can just do that. And the order matters. That's the order that the browser will try to use. And that's doable. And as I said, I'm not entirely sure it's still needed for all use cases, but if you can, why not? Maybe somebody out there is still using and fighting the empire with Internet Explorer, we don't know. Maybe. Okay, one important thing to add to this is, in our tool set, is one of the most basic things HTML had for images, which is width and height. Well, this is one of the two ways, actually, that you can use, it's my preferred way, but still, to avoid layout shifts. So what is a layout shift? When it happened to you for sure, that when you load a web page, you see some frame, you get an idea of what the page looks like while the content is being rendered or loaded if it's images. And then suddenly, when things start to render and images start to appear, that shape that you see changes. And since usually those renders and those images are loaded rather quickly, if things are done properly, that's kind of, you don't really notice, well, you actually really notice those layout shifts when they happen, and you don't really notice that everything is okay if they don't happen. So we want the users to not have that twitch in their eye when something shifts, right? We want it to be, the page load to be smooth. And so avoiding layout shifts is one of the best weapons to beat the empire. And so there are two ways to do that. One of those is specify, so set width and height of your images properly. It doesn't have to be, if you're, one question that you might ask is, how do I set that if I just said the browser can use different images, right? One can be 400 pixel wide and the other one could be 800, and I don't know what the browser will choose. So the important thing here is use any of those as this hint, any of the width and height of any of those different sources, because the browser will actually use this mainly to determine the aspect ratio of the image. the layout of the page with the CSS and stuff will actually, that's what the browser will use for determining the actual size of the image on the page. So this is a hint to the browser that says, hey, this image has these proportions, right? And the style that I added there, of course, I suggest you use CSS for that. It's just for brevity that I did it that way, that helps making your image responsive. It's not mandatory. I actually don't do that all the time. I handle that as needed for the specific situation. But that's to say, hey, even if you do that, you can make your image responsive by using CSS later on. So add width and height, and then make it responsive using CSS, when needed, of course. The second way to avoid layout shifts is, I already talked about aspect ratio. You can actually use the CSS aspect ratio property for that, and that's equally fine. One caveat here, I suggest you to use actual inline styles for the aspect ratio here. Otherwise, if your CSS is slower to load, it will be slower for the browser to know the aspect ratio. I mean, it's not always the case, but that's why I like the first situation more. And also, the width here is still for the responsive purposes. It's not, you don't need to do that. But you need to use the aspect ratio if you don't want to use the width and height. Then, these were the most important things, the ones that give you more power against the empire. The one gives you more points, a higher score. But there are a few extra little things that we can do and to have a better edge in this war. And one of those is async image decoding. And this is how you do that. So this means images, actually when the browser loads and shows an image, it's a two-step process. The first one is the download, and the second one is the decoding of the image, because it has to actually read it like it parses JavaScript. And this tells the browser, wait before decoding this image. Work on the rendering of the HTML and stuff, and then process the images that you downloaded. And of course, it's easy to, you might have thought already, so do I do that together with lazy loading? The answer is yes. And so, it's suggested, if you read about decoding on the MDN website, it's suggested to do that for every image that's off screen. So that's why it's usually paired with lazy loading. And of course, the reason is the same. You don't want to delay decoding and showing images when it's above the fold, when it's the first images you have on your web page. And what are the options for decoding? So the default here is automatic, and that means that the browser chooses, and so we don't really know what happens. If we want to decide how it happens, so automatic is usually sync, but then the browsers decide. So you can specify sync or async when needed. All the major frameworks like Next.js or Quick or any other actually usually add decoding together with async decoding together with lazy loading, and usually don't add anything if you're not lazy loading. Just as a hint on what can be done. They study these things for like several hours more than I do, of course. Okay, what's next? Very similar to this, on the opposite side, is a new experimental feature, which is a resource hint that you can give to the browser for the image priority. And that's done this way. So everything that I explained before this one is stable and available in all major browsers. This is actually experimental and only working in Chrome for now. It's pretty safe to assume that it will be implemented in the other ones. There are issues already for Safari and for WebKit, sorry, and for Firefox, but it's not there yet. What this means, you're hinting the browser what's the priority of your images. Say that above the fold on your homepage is one of the most dreaded items for developers, which is carousels. And you want high priority on the first item and low priority on the others, for example. And this is how you can tell that to your browser. And this basically prioritizes how the images are downloaded. Yeah, I told already. So this, of course, is basically the opposite of doing async decoding, because if you want high priority fetching, you also want faster decoding. So this is usually added when actually you don't have lazy loading. Okay, so the things that we saw until now are all the main tools, the efficient tools that we have to do image optimization. And there's an extra one, which is not necessarily for performance, but it is very important, which is alt attributes. Please, please, please add alt attributes. And what happens if I don't have text to write there, because it's just a picture of a cat when you, for example, in the text have this picture of a cat and blah, 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 blah. So it's not necessary to tell, for example, screen readers that there's a cat there. So there's two situations here. You can have an empty alt attribute, which is fine, and it's not the same as not having the alt attribute. Not having the alt attribute is not saying anything. Having an empty alt attribute is saying actually a lot, means something, means this is not relevant for content. And it's equally okay instead of having the alt attribute if you say the role of this image is just presentational. Yeah, this is very, very, very important. And while it's not a matter of performance, I wanted to stress it out. So there's a caveat to all these performance things, which is the sizes attribute that I didn't mention, that is usually actually nowadays mandatory to use with source sets. Why is it mandatory? Because I said that the browser can choose the image, the proper image, based on how big the image is rendered in the page. And that's true, that was true when source sets were introduced. That's not true anymore, because nowadays browsers prefetch images before they even finish rendering the HTML and parsing the CSS. Especially Chromium-based browsers do that. So they parse the HTML, and while rendering, they already start fetching the images. So how do they choose which one from the source set, which one to use? They don't know, so they go for the big one, just in case. And that voids completely the use of source set if you don't specify the sizes attribute. So what does this do? It basically tells the browser this image will be this big, or at least pretend that this image will be this big for these sizes. So you can specify media queries there. I used a mix of pixels and viewport width just to show that you can do both. So what that means is if the viewport is 1800 pixels wide or less, the image will be as big as the viewport. If the viewport is more than 800 pixels, the image will be at most 400 pixels. And so the browser will use this information to determine which source to use from the source set instead of what is on the page. And it actually works. It works we tested it, and the browsers do. And the browsers will still use pixel density and everything after using sizes to determine the image. So if you have a 1,000 pixel wide viewport on a 2x pixel density screen, it will use a 800 pixel image for that. So that's very important. So if you've been using source sets, and I know I discussed with some of you already, if you've been using source sets and didn't have luck with that, this could be one of the reasons. Okay, so what's the state of Plone on this? Plone generates image scales already, right? So we have a whole set of possible sources for each image. And that was already there when we started the discussion. And that's great because it pairs in an amazing way with the idea of source set. It's like it's what it was meant to help with source set to begin with, even if it's probably way older, I think. What Plone does not do today is generate different image formats. So Plone will not convert your images to WebP, unfortunately. I would really like to have one item added to Eriko's "I'll buy you a beer" list.
Actually, I have another one. Use Tumblr.
Use Tumblr was added to the list, which is it's fine. Yeah, that does solve this issue. And the third point here is, since Volto 17, which was released less than a week ago, you can use a proper component to render images that already handles most of the optimization that we talked about. And it does it on its own, knowing that Plone is generating the scales and such. You need to be, that's one important thing to be aware of, you need to be on Plone 6. You don't just need Volto 17. You need to be on Plone 6. So, how do we render images in Plone 6? So that's the basic usage of the image component. First line is there because the image component is in the Volto component registry, so that's a smart way to import that instead of a static JavaScript import. And I will go into more details about why we made this choice in a couple slides. And basically, you have an item object, which might be the content of the context of the view you are seeing. So you see you're in the news item view or event view, or and that's the full content of the item, and you pass it to the image. Or it can be a catalog brain or a summary from a relation field. You just give all of that to the image, and you really have to specify the alternative text for that, and the sizes, as I said, that's important. You just tell that to the image component, you give all of that to the image component, and all the rest is handled for you automatically. What does that mean? That means that all other props that attributes that we discussed have sane defaults for this image component, except alt. And of course, those defaults have been part of the image wars. And it took more than a year to find out what we really liked. But we're there. And still, feedback is happening after the release of this, and is welcome, of course. So what are all those props that you can change in this component? So the props are this one. The item, of course, as I said, can be a context item, can be a catalog brain. Image field, why is image field there? What is image field? So if you have a news item, an event, they have an image like in their schema, and the field is called image. But what if you have a custom content type with a different name or more than one image field? So the image component has to know when, where to look for the image, and which one of the several image field that you have in your item you want to render in this specific situation. So it defaults to image because it's the usually commonly used name, but you can specify a different one. It has a source property because we want you to use this component in any situation if you like it. And I have an example for this. So you can just give this component a string source instead of a Plone item object. And it will work fine. It has a loading property, just as the HTML component does. It has an extra property which is responsive. It just adds a class to the item, and there's 2 or 3 lines of code in Volto core CSS that handles, turns your image and it makes it responsive. So it adds max width, height, and stuff. So why these choices if, for example, most of the images are to be loaded lazily? That was a tough question. Several suggestions came in. Make the default value for loading lazy. And that makes sense, because you have to know as a developer when you want eager or lazy loaded images. But the policy that we went for is we want an image component that needs to be as similar, as close as possible to the native HTML image. We want it to be easy to grasp, and we want it to be easy to use when you start using it. Because if you know images, and you do after listening to these talks, you know what you have to add. So it would really be counterintuitive if after explaining what's the default for loading in an image, I told you that, yeah, but for our component is the other way around. Because. And so yeah, that's one of the policies that we went for. Same goes for responsive, because when you write an image in HTML, it's not responsive by default when you set its width and height. So you have to make it responsive. It generates a source set by default using the info that it has about the Plone scales. It makes no assumptions. It makes no choices. It uses all the scales that you have. So if you don't want to have 16, 32, 64, whatever pixel scales, just remove that from your site. There's been a few studies saying that you don't need, you don't need sources in your source set. I think it was below 200 pixels, but I don't remember by heart. Because the kilobyte size difference is too little to actually matter. But that's up to you as a developer in the end. And that's why no choice was made in this situation. Also, the sizes definition so the proper sizes attribute is left to the developer, because it is specific for every use case. We don't know if you have a grid of 3 teasers, or if you have a full width hero component, and why would I add 20 lines or 50 lines of JavaScript in an image, simple image component just to do the math. You know the layout, so you know it, and you just write the sizes attribute. And we did it. It's working fine. And lazy loading means async decoding. So when you set lazy loading here, async decoding is added for you. You can override that by adding sync decoding if you want. And on the other hand, if you set eager or don't set the loading attribute at all, fetch priority high is added for you. So those are the things that we went for. Going back to the source example, so the most basic usage of the image component is actually using it as an image. So if you use the image component and give it a string source instead of a Plone item, that's the output. And that's a success, in my opinion. I want you to use the image component always and then tweak its props based on your needs. So you don't forget the async decoding, for example, when you lazy load. But what if I pass a Plone item? So if basic usage is that is the output. So the image component takes your content and decides what the source set is and what's the default source, which I forgot to change, it's still a placeholder, but it's fine. And it gets the width and the height from the info that Plone has and does it for you. And what if you want lazy loading? That's the output, as I said. It's the same, async decoding is added for you. So you can already see it in action. Since it was released in Core Volto, it was also used in Core Volto. So this is just a sample of components that use it in Core Volto, which is the image block, the event view, but not just that. The preview image component, which is the one that's used, for example, in the listing block, or the teaser block. The image content type view, etc. And I have an example here, which is that's a cat, of course, because they help in the war. And this is an image content type. It's nothing fancy, no teaser block, etc. It's the most basic usage of that. And the image content type view just has the image component. And of course, it's bloated because I didn't remove any scale in my Plone. But you can see it has the responsive class, because I don't want to scroll horizontally on my mobile when I go to this page. It has fetch priority high, because that's the whole content of the page, so I want it to display as soon as possible. And it has an alternative text. It has width and height. Also has the aspect ratio. That's debated nowadays. This is added, but will be probably removed in a future release. It has all that it needs. And this actually ranks pretty high in Lighthouse. So, hints you might ask. How do I customize the image component? Using the Volto component registry. So why would I do that? I want to use my own version, my own implementation with intersection observer, hundreds of configuration and stuff. That's fine. You override the image component in the Volto component registry and you're good to go. You want a different image component just for your new custom content type? You can do that with the Volto component registry. That's fine. How do I decide whether to load lazily or not? Well, we discussed that already, actually. So above the fold images, please don't lazy load those unless they are hidden in some way. And how do I check which source is used from the source set? That's the main debugging situation that you want to see. And I have an example as my last slide. So when you select an image in the browser, you can actually go in the almost never used properties tab of the DevTools. And there is actually a current SRC property for the images, which is actually the string of the image that is currently being used there. And today I learned, right? And that's actually the only way that you have to see what image is used there. And yeah, I hope this was helpful, and thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Piero. There is a pull request for Plone scale and for Plone name file for WebP support.
Awesome.
Not
Good
a
to
pull
know.
request, just a branch. Yeah, I created them.
Good to know.
Hey, first of all, thanks for all the work. I remember the whole discussions about how to create scales back at Beethoven Sprint, and then I say, oh, I want to use Tumblr, and I know how to do it. It's quite easy. Thank you for that. I have a question that's the following. In Volto, we have the preview image link. That's a behavior that instead of uploading a new image to the content, you actually select one from an existing place. Does the new image this new image component handle that?
Yes, yes. The new image component handles an item summary, if you have a relation field of some sort. It handles it as well. For some reason that I don't know and I don't really want to go into, the shape in terms of what items are, what keys are in there of an item summary that you get from a relation field are way different from a catalog brain, and I hate that, but it's not the topic for this one. But it handles summaries. What I saw in some sites I worked on is sometimes the image scales are actually not properly served in summaries from relation fields, and that kind of sucks, but I don't know why that happens. That's a backend thing here. I don't do Python, sorry, I'm a bad guy. but when the scales come, it works, because they have the same keys in the item object, so it just works. You can sprint on that, yeah, it's fine. You, plural, you. Enrico will buy beers.
Piero, thank you, great talk. And also, thank you for the component. 2 questions. How does the image block, for example, or the teaser block decide which values to fill in for the sizes attribute?
Interesting. So there's, to make my answer quick, but maybe, let's see if I can show you. No, I can't. There's a function, there's a helper function defined in Volto to understand, so some math is done there to understand the size that has been chosen for the alignment value for the image, for the size value of the image. You know, the image block has all those configurations, small, medium, large, and that, et cetera, et cetera. So there's actually it is, some math is done based on the properties, and using this in the wild, you will find out that it's not always easy, because when you have a grid of items, of custom blocks, when you do custom blocks, sometimes you just put images in there and then it's fine, because it's just how you lay out stuff in your grids. And sometimes you have properties that editors can select for your images and for your layouts. That's when you have to do the math yourself based on the properties. So for example, there's a function calculating the different combination of the image block options, and based on that, it creates the sizes attribute. And that's customizable. I don't fully remember how. It's in a separate file, so if you override the image block or its properties, you can override that function as well. It's probably in the configuration as well, but I don't remember. It's for sure it's a separate file, so you can customize that. We thought about that. David Glick thought about that. Thank you. I didn't.
Okay, the second is, why are you planning to remove the aspect ratio? Is that because it cannot be unset in SRC, in CSS. We did the
Yes.
training on Volto customization, and we added a really nice feature to teaser block images where you can specify I think it's object cover, the attribute where you say like fit or scale, whatever. And that just doesn't work when there is any aspect ratio set. Is that the problem?
So the problem is, if you use it today, it adds, as you can see here, both the width and the height in the first attributes, and the style with the aspect ratio in the bottom. That's redundant, actually. And the thing is, if you have any CSS without an important thingy, it won't win against that style. So you have to specify, to add a style attribute to the image component and tell that in your JavaScript, you have to overwrite the aspect ratio. That's how you change the aspect ratio if you want. So there's an open issue about that, and it's a beer topic for Saturday.
Thank you. We can continue with more questions during the coffee time, okay?
Yeah.
We have coffee time here, 15 minutes until 11:20, okay?
Yeah, you can find me somewhere around coffee.